This photograph captures a swarm capable of blocking the sun across an entire region. For the ancient kingdom of Judah, an invasion of this magnitude represented the total collapse of their agricultural economy. Within hours, millions of insects would systematically strip the land. They consumed the wheat in the fields and gnawed the bark off fig trees until the branches were left white and lifeless. The nation's entire food supply vanished in a single afternoon. Joel describes this disaster as a military invasion. He depicts the insects as a highly organized, relentless army, breaching city walls and entering houses through windows, like a force that cannot be bargained with or outrun. The consequences were spiritual as well as physical. Because the grain and wine were gone, the daily offerings at the temple stopped. For a nation that defined itself through its connection to the divine, the silence at the altar meant that connection was broken. This wasn't a random occurrence of nature. Joel presents the plague as a targeted alarm, designed to jar the people out of their moral and spiritual sleep. Joel expands the scope of this crisis, identifying the bug swarm as the forerunner of a far larger threat, the Day of the Lord, a time of final, divine reckoning for the entire world. This coming day is marked by signs in the heavens. Joel warns that the sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood, effectively extinguishing the celestial lights that provide order to the world. There is no earthly defense against a force of this scale. As these rolling storm clouds suggest, the approach of God's judgment is inescapable, leaving any traditional military response completely irrelevant. If a localized insect plague could bring a nation to pointed knees, the scale of this final day leads to Joel's ultimate question: who can possibly endure it? At the height of this terror, the narrative takes a sharp reversal. The upward climb of the narrative stops, offering an opportunity to alter history. Outward religious rituals are insufficient. The only effective response is heart-level surrender, the command to rend your hearts and not your garments. This opportunity exists because of the specific character of God. Joel reminds the people that the Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and eager to change his course from destruction to blessing. Scholars call this the chiastic pivot. As this structural analysis shows, the entire book is built like a mirror. The call to repentance in the center is the specific point where the judgment from the first half reflects as restoration in the second. Heartfelt repentance is the structural hinge that turns the threat of the day of the Lord into a promise of mercy. The upward climb of the narrative begins with the physical healing of the land. This photograph shows the return of the seasonal rains, which Joel presents as the first sign of God's renewed favor. The recovery is comprehensive. The wheat fields return, replacing everything the locusts devoured, with harvest piles so large they filled the threshing floors once again. This restoration mirrors the destruction from the start of the book. As this harvest of heavy grape clusters shows, the vineyards recover until the vats overflow with wine, undoing the famine step by step. This material abundance serves as visible proof that God is once again dwelling in the midst of his people, fulfilling his promise to restore the years the locusts have eaten. The return of the crops sets the stage for Joel's final vision, a universal spiritual outpouring that moves far beyond the borders of a single harvest. This promise removes all traditional social barriers. Joel specifies that God's Spirit will be poured out on all people, including male and female servants, even the youth and the elderly, creating a community defined solely by the presence of God. This vision was realized centuries later in Jerusalem during the Festival of Pentecost. As this skyline view reminds us, people from every nation had gathered in the city when a miraculous event began to transform the early believers. The Apostle Peter identified this moment as the fulfillment of Joel's prophecy. As we see in this analysis of his sermon, Peter used the ancient text to explain that the Spirit of God was now accessible to everyone. This outpouring allowed the community to expand into a global movement, providing the functional completion to Joel's upward structure. The presence of the Spirit became the evidence of God's permanent dwelling with mankind. Through the lens of Joel's blueprint, we see that the crisis of the locusts was ultimately used to deliver a message of hope, that in the face of judgment, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved.